Welcome to the Vitamin Professor podcast, brought to you by VRM Media, publisher of Vitamin Retailer and Nutrition Industry Executive magazines, in partnership with Nutraland USA. I'm your host, Bruno, Professor Emeritus of Nutraceutical Science and Chief Scientific Officer of Nutraland USA. The purpose of this podcast is to help educate the dietary supplement industry about the science of nutraceuticals and other relevant topics. If you like what you hear and see, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Loren Israelsen is president and founder of the United Natural Products Alliance, or UNPA. For 43 years, he's been deeply involved in the political, regulatory, and commercial issues facing the global dietary supplement industry. He's authored several hundred articles and book chapters on dietary supplements and their regulation. Currently, his greatest interests are the growing presence of advanced technologies entering the natural products industry and preservation of the cultural knowledge on which the natural products industry is founded. Welcome, Loren.
Thank you, Gene. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I want to start with a little history here. I want you to take us back to the 1980s. What was happening that the industry felt compelled at that time to go to Congress to pass a law about dietary supplements? Surely you tried other approaches first, given how difficult it would be to take on a legislative battle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you don't get into legislation and go fight the fights in Congress without thinking about it very carefully and exhausting all other options. So let me set the stage, what things were like in the 1980s, other than fashion was really at a low tide there for a while. But that aside, we'll look at what's going on in the question is, should we even call it the dietary supplement industry? Because that term didn't legally exist at that point. And that was actually part of our problem. Is the vitamin mineral industry is what we really understood through the 1950s, 60s, 70s. In fact, there was legislation in 1976 to protect the right to buy vitamins and minerals at whatever potency the company felt was appropriate and in any combination. That was also something our industry achieved through legislation, and that was called the Proxmire Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
What that taught us is that there is this ongoing friction between our industry, the dietary supplement industry, and FDA. People often ask, what is the problem between you two? And often I'll say, the problem is because FDA was created with a binary system of foods and drugs. Everything they regulated had to be one or the other. There was really no other options. Now, within the food side of this equation, there are things called food additives. That's what you find in Cool Whip. It's all these chemical named ingredients that you normally would prefer to keep out of your diet, but they're used to stabilize and to do technical functions. Remember that word food additive, because that comes back quite a lot here in this period. So what happened is the industry was growing, and particularly the botanical sector there was a growing interest in the 1960s, late 60s, a lot was going on. The Vietnam War, there was a lot of political dissent. There was change in the air. There was a sense of revolution. And there was also this outburst of energy for botanicals and natural medicines, partly a rejection of the status quo, what our parents were doing. And there were several kind of root fountains, if you will, of knowledge about botanicals. One of them was here in Utah, where I'm speaking to you from, a wonderful herbalist named Dr. John Christopher. And he's taught many herbalists how to use the formulas of traditional lore that go back into American history, But you also had a cultural movement on the West Coast. A lot of hippies. So they were up in the mountains
Oh,
growing.
yeah.
And at a certain point, many of them decided, we probably ought to diversify our portfolio here. Sometimes get a little bit tricky just growing one crop, which may not be favored by the federal government or state governments at that time. So they were also developing their own herbal formulas and just this reemergent knowledge. Well, this was a problem for FDA. What do you do with companies that are now selling things in food forms, teas, capsules, tablets? And FDA looked at these and said, these aren't foods. And so, well, what could they be? It's either a drug or it's a food additive. You don't want to be either one of those. But they persisted and pushed and pushed and pushed, and they were really literally pushing the industry back into a corner. They were raiding companies. There was a very famous case up in Washington State where a medical doctor who was giving people B12 injections so they'd feel better was raided by the FDA and local police, and they came in SWAT outfits, jackets, guns, people on the floor, hands behind their heads, terrified everybody. And this was over B12 vitamin injections.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. It also hit the news. And this became a national story, and it became a really black eye for the FDA. And people who didn't use supplements, didn't know much about them, said, what is happening? Why are you beating up doctors, giving people vitamins?
Yeah.
Well, then we get into FDA's rating companies, literally. That became pretty serious business. Then something happened in 1990. Congress passed a law called the Nutrition Labeling Education Act. We
I
know that,
remember that.
yeah, very important, NLEA. The two things that our listeners might understand about NLEA, it created the nutrition facts box that you see on your cereal and on all of the products that you buy as conventional foods. How much fat, sodium, calories, et cetera, et cetera. Before that, we really didn't have any organized way to show consumers what was in the foods they were buying. That was a great idea. That was a big success. The other part of it, however, was a problem for us. This was the creation of health claims. So for the first
Exactly.
time, companies could describe how a food could help prevent a disease. Now, that all started because Kellogg was selling a breakfast cereal called All Bran, still around today. Many people still use it. Bran turns out to be very helpful to reduce the risk of colon cancer. Kellogg had done a lot of research. They had gone to the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, the Federal Trade Commission, presented their data and said, what do you think? And they said, you've got the data. As far as we're concerned, you can say that All Bran will help reduce the risk of certain types of cancers. So
Yeah.
they did. The problem was FDA said, hell no, you can't say that. That's a drug claim. Well, that led to a big fight, and that was resolved by Congress in 1990, who said, no, companies, if they have adequate evidence to show a relationship between a food, a nutrient, and a disease prevention benefit, then they can describe that. So today we have about 25 or so approved health claims, and you'll see these fairly often
Right.
on various
The
foods.
health claims was kind of I remember that as one of the bigger things. I remember getting training in that at the time. And
Right.
now as we look in the dietary supplement industry, some of those health claims are applicable, but a lot of them just really aren't to dietary supplements. But there's
That's
still a
right.
few that are.
That's right. The problem was this was restricted only to nutrients. And so we
Yeah.
came in and said, wow, okay, we like the idea of health claims for nutrients, but what about non-nutrients? What about other things? Botanicals, fish oil, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, no, that's out. It's too late to put that kind of thing into this bill. And we said, if you don't find a way to keep us in, then we have nothing that would allow us to tell consumers the benefit of our products. And they said, that's your problem. So, so in 1990, an LEA passes, and sure enough, we had a problem. FDA began to use that as another tool to push companies back. to say, not only do we don't want you selling botanicals and all these other things because they're not, quote, legal, but you can't say anything about them on top of that. What are we going to do? So we had many meetings with FDA and just kept saying, there's got to be an accommodation. Botanicals, herbs, they've been on this planet longer than people and have been used by people for their good health and well-being for centuries, if not millennia. And FDA said, not our problem. You can't say anything about them. So after, a good 2 years of constant meetings and discussions, and we considered traditional medicines. Could we come up with a plan to do that? Nope, can't do that. Well, could we modify NLEA in some way? Can't do that. Basically, we're stuck. So in a famous meeting with FDA, we, by the way, I didn't tell you one important thing. In a very, initially, a very, I would say discreet, maybe little too confidential process, the commissioner of FDA at that time, his name was David Kessler.
I remember.
He told a team of people at FDA, I want you to write me a report. How does the FDA think that dietary supplements should be regulated? Give me a white paper. So they come back in about 6-9 months. And now we're hearing rumors about this. And we asked FDA directly and said, no, there's nothing going on here. And then we finally had a couple members of Congress ask, and then they kind of, you shouldn't mislead members of Congress. And they said, well, yeah, actually, we do have a project like that. So the report was published. It was famously called the Dykstra report, that after the name of the chairman of the committee. Guess what it said? Dietary supplements are either food additives or drugs, or should not be sold at all. You can't make any claims for them. It was just a repeat of everything.
Everything they said, yeah.
So we were nowhere. In the final meeting with FDA, one of the most senior people at the agency was really tired of this. He said, if you don't like these rules, go talk to the Congress. Famous last words. So we did. So that was the setup from the 1980s, that you could see the pressure was building and growing from all these different directions. We had nowhere to go, backs against the cliff. We're about to fall off into the ocean. And we thought the only choice left is we got to go to Congress and get them to change the law. And so that's when UNPA was formed. I here in Utah, I was working for Nature's Way at that time. I'd been there for 10 years. So I knew the industry, and I was a big fan of botanicals. That's what our company specialized in. And but I also had spent time working in Congress. I worked for Senator Orrin Hatch in his first term. I'd gone to law school, so I had a legal background as well as political background. And then I was one of the first lawyers to ever work inside the natural product industry. So I had this very odd, I would say, career path, but it turned out to be just right. If you're going to go tackle Congress and have legal and political and dietary supplement issues, I was pretty well suited to take that one on.
I dare say you were.
Yeah, and so
lucky for us as an industry.
Well, we all kind of have our moment, I think. And so I invited 8 of the larger Utah companies to sit down for about 6 months. We worked it out, kept asking ourselves, what would it do to really kind of fix this whole problem? What do we need? We worked up a template, so we had some specific ideas. And so when we thought we were ready, I flew back to Washington, D.C., had made an appointment with Senator Hatch. And he had always said, look, if you need help, come talk to me as an industry. And so I said, Senator, I'm here because we need help. And we need some relief. That we've had some legislation and other things happening where we've been pushed back into a corner, nowhere to go. And he said, I understand, count me in. Go find yourself a Democrat in the House of Representatives and we'll get this thing started. So the easiest part of the whole thing was getting it started, actually finding some really important members of Congress that were willing to support. And so that was the beginning of what we now know as the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, or DSHEA, as you told the audience. And this is the 30th anniversary of this landmark legislation, which is why you and I are talking today.
Right. You know, thank you, first of all, for that great background. There's not as many of us in this industry these days that have been around long enough to remember all of that. And so I think this is an excellent podcast for posterity, for everybody to understand, kind of what led up to this and things that we take for granted today, that we don't know the work that went into it. I mean, look, we've both been in the industry over 40 years, but for those of our listeners who are newer to the natural products industry, can you give us a little sense of what the industry was like at that time? Who were the brand leaders? What product categories were big? Who were the organizations in the industry at that time?
Right. It was a very different industry at the time, much smaller, much smaller. We were in let's just set the date, okay? So pre-DSHEA 1992, we're just now trying to roll into our big legislative effort. We're probably somewhere at about maybe $3 billion. We're now 65, getting close to $70 billion, just to give people a sense of scale.
Right.
We had one big trade show, one big convention, which we still have, by the way. It's called Expo West, and we meet in Anaheim, California. It's now a gigantic, one of the biggest convention venues in the country. But at that time, you had a little turtle-shaped building, and that was the Anaheim Convention Center. And we filled half of that. So there might have been altogether 1,500, 2,000 people tops, absolute tops. The industry was really populated by mom and pop health food stores around the country. Now, many people who weren't familiar with health foods or supplements, herbal teas, things of this nature, they knew there was this little shop in town that sold kind of goofy stuff, and it had a funny smell. You would walk in, it either smelled like vitamins, sometimes like herbs, or just things
God forbid they had some valerian sitting on the shelves. Then it
oh boy, that would drive anybody out of the store. And so I was one of those people. When I grew up, I had no background in this industry at all, but I was a long distance runner, so we were told to go to the health food store and get certain things that were nutritious, and like Tiger's Milk bars, things like that.
Oh my goodness, yes, I remember those.
Right. And so anyway, so the industry, very small in terms of its economic footprint, the number of people actually in the industry, relatively small. The centers of industry geographically very strong on the West Coast. Los Angeles was a real hot spot. Utah, for interesting reasons, was an important center of commerce, as was Long Island, New York, which is where most of the vitamin companies were located. And there was some activity in and around Chicago, a bit of it in Florida, up in the Northwest in Seattle, which was a stronghold for naturopathic medicine. So that was a different part, but still a part of our industry. But most everybody really didn't understand or know much about our products. And today, people will chit chat casually and talk about ginkgo, echinacea, omega-3 fatty acids, probiotics. The list goes on, essential oils, and this is common. Everybody knows this. I'm telling you, in the 1990s, early 1990s, almost nobody knew this. We're talking about the happy few of us in this industry that actually knew and used these terms. So there was a big gulf between us and the general population. The brands of the day, most of them are gone. Thompson Vitamins.
I remember Thompson. You had Rich Life. You had Plus. You had yes. Carlson.
Carlson was around. Yeah, you had Nature's Way.
Nature's Way was a big one.
Was a big one. Nature's Herbs was out there.
Yeah, Nature's Herbs.
Right, right.
I
So
know that one. The company I used to work for
yeah,
bought that
exactly.
brand.
Right, right. And in the food sector, you had, well, some legacy brands you'd even know now. So Bob's Red Mill was
Oh, yes, yes.
around, still a fabulous company today. You had Dr. Bronner and his soap
Bronner's.
products
Yeah, yeah, for
that
sure.
were still, again, still around
Still
and
around, yeah.
still,
And the
had,
and the bottle, the label doesn't look too different.
yeah, right. The label is maybe not well, it's hard to read for sure.
Sure.
There's a whole lot of news and information on there. But this was the kind of thing that the general consumer would look at and say, I just don't understand what these products are all about. They are kind of odd. But bit by bit, people took an interest, especially when one of three things happened. The birth of a first child was a real game changer in the minds of mom, dad, to look after the baby. And then they would become very conscious of the environment, of the house, and begin to think in terms of more natural foods. Uh, a sudden illness would certainly trigger that.
That was a
Uh,
big deal.
Big deal. And particularly the unexpected death, family member, close friend, those three things caused people to pause and reconsider mortality. And
I have to tell you, what I remember, because I started in the industry in '79, and I was managing vitamin stores, and I remember, of those big three you mentioned, I think the one that I saw the most were people got sick. They got something,
right.
and they were walking in looking for something to help them. I think that was, for in
Yeah.
my particular experience, the most common reasons, although I saw the other reasons pop
Yeah.
up as well. But I think that was the biggest one.
I agree, Gene. And I used to read all of the correspondence coming in when I was at Nature's Way in the early years I was there, because I was just interested to learn who our consumers were. And these were some of the most touching letters you can imagine. And as they would describe that they had been through just so much in medical treatments, chemotherapy, radiation, had really gone through it. And then were
Sure.
told, this is all we can do. And they thought there has to be something more. And I think they became very conscious that their nutrition was deficient, that chemosurgery and radiation, this really takes it out of you. How do you restore the body, re-energize it? How can you support it along the way? So we would see a lot of medical refugees that would come into the stores. GNC was a big player at that time.
Yep. My
Uh,
first job.
yeah, and Great Earth, really,
Yep.
fine line of stores. Mrs. Gooch's markets on the West Coast.
Oh, Mrs. Gooch's. Yeah.
Yeah, really some great stores. Very people oriented, service oriented, very passionate. And so you set the stage as nobody would really take us seriously as a political force. And so when we marched to Washington and said we're going to change the law, there weren't too many people that took us seriously.
Yeah. They weren't shaking in their boots.
No, they weren't changing their plans for sure. Whatever they were doing, they were going to be fine.
You know, so I, I want to ask this question, you know, about Deshay, because again, people take a lot for granted and people have a general understanding of what it is. But what did you really want to achieve with Deshay? And do you think you got what you wanted? And when I say you, I mean,
The collective
all of you.
you.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
collective you.
Yeah, the royal you. Yeah. Um, Here is what we wanted. Number one, a definition. We wanted a definition so we would have a green card, a passport that would basically say, this is us. And that turned out to be a real fight. You wouldn't think so, maybe, but it was. So the definition of a dietary ingredient, which are the things that go into a dietary supplement: vitamin, mineral, herb, amino acids, metabolites, or other substances intended to support the diet. Now, That last part was very broad, and it was intended to capture all of the other things that you really couldn't put into a list of things. So the whole idea of having vitamins, minerals, herbs, amino acids, and other things that you choose to support the diet. Granted, that's the broadest definition, to my knowledge, in the world for what is a dietary supplement. I think that we got that right, that it was broad enough to begin to encompass all of the things that began to come into the marketplace that we couldn't think of back in 92 to 94. So that's number one, we got it. Number two, we wanted expressly stated that we are not food additives. We got that. We wanted good manufacturing practices. So at the time, our GMPs were the same as general food GMPs, but we're making dosage forms, and that's a trickier business when you're trying to blend a whole lot of vitamins or minerals to get the potencies and the ratios just right. That takes a lot of skill, and that goes beyond what normal foods, good manufacturing practices would do. We got that. We wanted an office within the federal government that would be responsible for collecting, organizing, and educating the public about the role of dietary supplements. We got that there is an office at the National Institutes of Health called the Office of Dietary Supplements. And to this day, that is their job, and they do it well. There were some other things in there that we ended up with that are really important, a grandfather clause. So we were able to protect legally a lot of these ingredients that were in the marketplace for many, many years, so that FDA would recognize them as presumptively safe. Then we ended up with something called the new dietary ingredient provision. So anything new that comes to market that's really new, and there's a definition for that, then you need to take that to FDA to notify them, present your evidence of how it's safe, and then in 75 days, they have to give you a yes or a no, or to say we need more information and give us a little bit more time.
You know, I thought, you know, one of the most valuable things to come out of there was the structure function claim allowance. To me, that was just so vital. To me, again, that's the meat and potatoes of having communications with the public about dietary supplements.
It was. It was. We solved the NLEA problem that we couldn't talk about.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. So
that was awesome.
Yeah. So if you look at the Shane Reed and you say, I don't see these words structure function claim, and that's true. You don't find it by that title. They're technically called statements of nutritional support. But when you read on, it describes what that is. It's a claim that will describe how a dietary supplement will affect a structure or function of the body, such as valerian will help promote restful sleep, or curcumin will help support healthy joints. And there are many, many variations. Right. And I'm sure many of the viewers know exactly what we're talking about. They see them on their products every day. That was created by Deshay, and that was a very critical step, as you say, to give us a chance to explain to a much broader audience of people that didn't know anything. So to say that something will help promote restful sleep, good to know. I think I'll give that a try. So previously, we were just gagged. We just couldn't say anything legally. And that was a fundamental change. So, boy, when you ask the question, Gene, how much did we want and what % of that did we get? We pretty much got everything that was essential. And then we got some of the bonus things that we wanted. We look at it as a real win, a complete win. It doesn't mean FDA has interpreted everything the way that we do.
Oh, indeed.
And so we do have disagreements with FDA over their interpretation of what some of the language in DSHEA says.
So that leads me then to another question. If I handed you a magic wand right now, and that would let you change, let's say one thing in DSHEA, what would it be?
Here's what it would be. There's something called the preclusionary clause. And so this came at the very end of our intense negotiations. Intense. And we were going through, okay, well, let's separate out old ingredients and we'll grandfather those in. And then we have a date, which is October 15, 1994.
94.
That's just a magic date. We decided that was the day. And anything that came to the market after October 15, 1994 was new. Okay. Then at the very last minute, one of the key senators said, okay, well, what happens if you have a dietary supplement that happens to be the same ingredient as something that would be in a pharmaceutical drug? Don't we have to protect the research and investment interests of the drug industry? And we said, well, what do you think? He said, well, yeah, I think we have to do that. And so, well, how do we do that? This created what was called a race to the market provision. So the way it's supposed to work is that if we're working on something and we bring it to market first, well, then a pharmaceutical company can also take it to market, but they can't kick us out.
Really?
But there's a second part of that equation. If the pharma company has something, I'll use a specific example in a minute, they come to market first, or they do research before we bring the same thing or very similar to the market, they win, we cannot come to market. Here's the problem, is the way FDA interprets this is that they take a look back perspective to say, well, if whatever you want to bring to market, you have brought to market, was ever done, researched as a potential drug, that will knock you out. They were there first because they were doing research, even if it didn't develop into anything. And there were interpretations of that kind. Well, we're not at all happy with that because CBD, for example,
Right.
got caught up in that. But that was a special case because it was a controlled substance until 2018, when Congress passed an agricultural bill and then changed the legal status of hemp. And there's other really interesting examples where important products in our industry have either almost been knocked out. So NAC, a very popular.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Well, FDA said, okay, now NAC was studied in the early 1960s. It was not as an oral dosage form. It was never really used widely as a drug, but it was still out there. That's a perfect example of FDA just rummaging around, find something and say, well, okay, it was there first and you can't sell NAC. Well, that just triggered a wave of protests from the industry. And we said, that is not how you interpret this provision. So the magic wand that you handed me is I would go back in there and rewrite that section to make it really clear that we're talking about a prospective look forward. You can't go rummage around and keep looking for stuff in the past because that just doesn't work. So that would fix a lot of problems and it would remove a lot of uncertainty that is limiting companies' ability to develop new products because they're always afraid they're going to step on that landmine. And
Yeah.
FDA is going to say, oh, guess what? There's a drug out there that was before you. So sorry, you can't go to market.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah, that is a problem. So, which sort of also makes me think and want to ask you, if we need to defend Deshay, which doesn't seem unlikely, if that, well, certainly if that became necessary, how, if you were going to give us a grade, how would you grade our readiness to defend Deshay at this point in time?
Ooh, you're not going to like this, but we're a D.
I suspected.
Yeah, we're a D. Why are we a D? Is first, on the congressional side, we had the best political champions you can imagine for almost 30 years. Senator Hatch was the longest serving Republican senator in American history. Senator Harkin was a tremendous friend for 20 years after Deshay. Senator Harkin is retired. Senator Hatch has passed away. We have not raised up the next generation of leadership to support Deshay. And the Congress is a very different place than it was in 94.
Yeah, sure as heck is.
Yeah, well, the difference is, first, imagine you have a very senior Democrat and a very senior Republican able to work together jointly, collaboratively in the interest of the consumer, which they did. Give me an example today of where
No,
we see
no,
that
that doesn't
happen.
happen today. Yeah.
So we have that problem. Congress is just all knotted up. Second, we don't have the political leadership. Third, we have an aging group of industry leaders, myself included, that we're veterans of Deshay, but it won't be very many years that we too will retire or pass the torch on to others. And there are very few younger members of industry that have ever had to fight to defend Deshay. They've never had to do it, so they don't have the experience. And to be honest, many people today are far more apolitical than in previous generations. And I really kind of worry is, will they care enough? And if they do, would they have the skills and the tenacity to go and do what was done not once, but twice before? My generation and the previous generation both had to go fight and win bills in Congress. Do we have what it takes to go fight that hard fight, particularly in the complicated and difficult environment of the Congress today with no political leadership? That's why we get a D.
So what I'd like to do is end this interview with a question on let's call it an up note. You're approaching your 45th year in the industry.
Yeah.
And lots of changes, but there's things that have happened, concerns that are out there, but there's also things that people like you and I see that may excite us, that we feel positive about. I'm interested to hear what changes you're seeing today that excites you for this industry.
There are a number of things that I think are very promising and that I'm pretty excited about. When I talk about the younger members of industry, and on the political side, I think there's a weakness there. But on the other side, I'm seeing a real burning passion in so many young people that really want to protect the earth. They want to protect the natural resources. They're interested in sustainable and regenerative agriculture. They're excellent communicators. They know how to get in front of a large audience as influencers. They know how to use social media. And wow, we can see today just how capable and how skilled they are to reach a lot of people. And they're excellent at communicating, reaching out and touching people, sharing the message that people say, that's me, that's me. And that brings people to the industry. I think there's a lot that we should, and this is not me, I'm not a tech native, I'm not a digital native, and anyone that knows me can confirm that. But I'm watching how people are using technology in appropriate ways, things like artificial intelligence, which, wow, friend and foe. This is a big and
Right.
complicated one. But I think in the right hands with a good heart, this is a powerful tool to help us really discover the next generation of what the natural world can bring us. The ability to research vast amounts of data and information
Yes.
that took forever and now can be done in a matter of minutes, if not seconds even. I think there's a lot to be encouraged about that. So I every time I go to the shows and I see some of the young generation and just how much they want to contribute and do something, and what they're looking for is mentors and leadership. Give me a job. I'm a dog that needs a job, and give me something to do. And I'm very much focused on that in this last part of my career, and doing programs like this fits ideally into that, is to say to that younger generation, we want you, we need you, we're looking to you to lead the way. We understand that there's a lot you would like to learn and to know. So you understand your history, you understand what's come before, how that can inform how you will look at issues today. And I'm ready to share everything that I know with anybody who wants to know it, to try and prepare them for the next generation.
I feel the same. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that.
I love this industry. It's the only professional career I've ever had. And I can't imagine, frankly, doing, and you too, Gene.
I feel exactly the same, Loren.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I want to finish on a really high note. And the best thing you can do is share everything you've got, put it into forms like this that make them somewhat permanent. But sitting down and just being with people, I find, is still the very best of all. So that they can learn the value of the oral tradition, is to sit with someone that can teach them. This is how I was taught, and I'll venture you as well, is to listen to the great leaders of the industry and some of the really colorful and interesting people
Indeed.
that never took no for an answer. And I that was a lesson I learned, is you're going to hear no a lot. And you just have to say, I don't understand the word no. And you keep going. And you just you work it and you work it until you figure it out. And I would say it's how to be rebellious in a righteous way, if I can put it that way.
Yes, you absolutely can. I love that. Rebellious in a righteous way. That is
Yeah,
an awesome term.
it's
Can I quote you on that in the future?
you can use it. I hope more
Thank
people
you.
use it.
Thank you.
Is Yeah, that's who we are. If you were to summarize it, is we're rebels with a righteous cause, and we really believe we're doing the right thing, and we're here to help people. Many of the people I've grown up in this industry, they had no intent of making a business or making any money. Many did along the way, it turns out, but their heart was in, I was helped, my family, I was saved, or my mom and my dad, whoever. Their stories are legion, and they're beautiful, and they need to be recorded and to be told, to say, I was in that position that so many people at this moment are in, looking for that help, that open heart and informed mind that can say, I see you, I hear you, I feel what you're going through. Come with us. There's a way we can help and be a part. And it's transformed the lives of so many people. That's why we do this. And I'm grateful I've had a chance to be a part of this.
You know, well, I am too. And I just want to say this to our listeners. This is why, which you've heard Loren talk about here today, but also just what he's talked about at the very end, is the reason that if you're not already a member of UNPA, you need to be a member, because UNPA is there to help you as a company in some of your needs and what struggles you're up against that they can be helpful with. But it's also a forum for you to become involved. They have committees to serve on. You can become involved. They empower you to be part of the solution. And I know the company I work for is a member of UNPA. Companies I used to work for are members of UNPA. And in my personal experience in dealing with UNPA, I find them to be the most valuable of the of the trade organizations. That's just my opinion. But I would encourage everybody, if you don't know more about UNPA, you're interested in joining, please go to the website, look at it, call somebody there, send an email, learn more about it, because you need to be a member if you're not already. Thank you, Loren. I appreciate the time you've spent with us today, and reminding everybody again, if you like what you heard, please like and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene.